This spring series is on prosperity and the popular. So we're looking at the radical potential of the popular, and we're starting from the view that the social and cultural relations, meanings and artefacts that hold communities together are a platform for critical ideas and strategies that can advance prosperity and inclusion. This perspective is vital, we believe, at the current historical moment in which multiple crises are creating the conditions for authoritarian populism to take advantage of exclusion and poverty, despite, of course, ostensibly promising to remedy the gulf between the people and the elites. So this afternoon, I'm delighted to welcome to the IGP Jo Carter, who established Immediate Theatre in 1996 to create a relationship between her work and the community in Hackney where she lives. Prior to this, Jo worked as a freelance director and project development worker for a range of organisations, leading new writing and education programmes. And these included the Royal Court, Plains Plough, the Liverpool Everyman, Theatre Powys, the Half Moon Young People's Theatre. Now, Jo is a chair of governors for a local primary school. She's a trustee of Mayor Productions and Manbury, a local arts council national portfolio organisation. She's an artist and director, and during her career, Jo has developed plays which introduce older audiences of differing cultural backgrounds, invaluable for delivering intergenerational and inclusive work in London. Now, we're wonderfully lucky to have her with us this afternoon, so please, will you welcome her to the IGP?
Very much. I clearly need to update my CV. I would like to say I'm no longer chair of governors of a primary school. If you're ever asked to do that job, say no. It's a lot of work. So yeah, I'm Jo, and I am the founder of Immediate Theatre. As Henrietta said, I used to work in mainstream theatre. In actual fact, I was working in the West End, watching a show every night of the week with audiences coming in from all over the world, when I suddenly realised that I wanted to make theatre for an audience with whom I had a relationship. And so I see that the mainstream arts, which I love going to, I think is wonderful, but actually for the artist to have a relationship with your audience, you need to have a much closer relationship. And I believe in the power of the arts and the power of storytelling to be part of the process of change and creating a healthy and happy community. So I kind of, by sitting in the West End watching the same show, which was very good, night after night, I had that moment. Also key to this, and I will come back to, is that around the same time, I got offered social housing. I was housed by Hackney in a hard-to-let flat, and that made it possible. So throughout this, I'm going to be talking about the relationship between the artist, but also the artist within a community and within a responsive and supportive community. So that is key. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to give you a very quick rundown of what Immediate Theatre does right now. I'm not really expecting you to totally absorb this, but I will just give you a little bit of context. I'm going to give you a little bit of context about Hackney. Anybody here live in Hackney or knows Hackney? Yeah, a few of you, but I just kind of place it for everybody else, and also maybe even those of you that live there give you a little bit more background. And then I'm going to pick out 3, possibly 4 stories, which I hope will kind of give you a bit more detail about what we do. And if we get there, see how my time goes, but end with one which is very much about current change and the future and relationships between the arts and, the local council and local statutory providers, which is a very new thing happening in Hackney. So that's my aim. However, we may get sidetracked. So, Immediate Theatre actually finished celebrating 25 years, but it gives you a context. So, very briefly, this is our vision and purpose. We remain committed to a vision of society where questioning, articulated and motivated people create and collaborate to build thriving communities. Our purpose is to involve communities in creative projects that inspire well-being, break down barriers, and engage people in the process of social change. I think something that I kind of skipped out that you briefly mentioned before, but my moment when I kind of left mainstream theatre, of looking at that play and feeling, well, here we are in the West End. People who've had fairly affluent lives, middle classes, we have our stories told everywhere. We have our stories told in novels, we have our stories told on film, we have our stories told in books. It's really important to be able to read things where you see your story, your life played back to you. That is a really valuable process. But the people that I wanted to engage had not had their stories told. So at the heart of immediate theatre is the importance of having your story told, and that is really important within an equal society, is that everybody's story is being heard. I would say, I think things are slightly better 25 years on. I think, interestingly, I set this company up just as a Labour government came into power, and there was support for the arts and support for this kind of work. I think the Tories have had a negative impact on that, but interestingly, and I'll come back to this, I think as a result of COVID, potentially the government is seeing that they may need to change this, and the power of very localised grassroots work where the people doing the work know the story of the people they're working with. So I hope I'll manage to get back to that point. I won't go through our objectives, but I mean, basically we run programmes in the community. I mean, I've currently got a staff team of about 16. We run 9 youth theatres. We have a Pathways to Employment programme. A lot of our work is around improving health and well-being. We're not looking at developing wonderful, brilliant actors, although we sometimes do. We're looking at using the power of theatre to improve people's confidence, self-esteem, and give them the tools to voice their ideas and have their stories heard. Next slide. I think important, our values, and actually these values were created in year 2 of the company. We're inclusive, we work at the grassroots, and we celebrate diversity. We're interactive, we involve communities throughout the creative process, and we're imaginative, finding new ways to engage with vital issues. So we're not going to come in and do something to a community, we're going to come in and do something with a community, and to as much an extent as we can, we will be part of that community rather than, so we're looking at a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. Very interesting, sorry, I'm digressing. I sit on all sorts of leadership boards, and somebody said, we haven't got enough grassroots representation here. And so we went into this interesting conversation, what is a grassroots organisation? And somebody said, immediate theatre would not look like a grassroots organisation right now because we get our funding through saying we will achieve certain criteria. So we are, in effect, following funders. But I set this up pre-internet times. I put notices in local newsagents' windows and arranged a meeting in a local community hall, and 30 local artists turned up. That is grassroots. And what we have now has evolved from that relationship between artists and the community. So, current programmes. I did a bit of this. We have kind of 3 areas of work. We have our youth programmes, we have 9 programmes, all on local estates. So they're targeted in key areas of need. So Kingsmead Estate, Nightingale Estate, for any of you that know this, but they're literally put in the hotspot area, the areas of multiple deprivation. Young people can literally walk in off the street. I mean, we do have to register them, but the idea is that we don't think those young people will go, ooh, I want to do acting, and I can catch a bus to Hackney Central to do it at the Empire. Access is essential, and access for people who don't know they want to do it, but by doing it, benefit from it. Briefly, Rise Up East is funded by the Violence Reduction Unit at the GLA. So it's about kind of more intense work in a certain area where there are very high levels of violence. So it's also about relationships. We have lots of our work is about partnerships. So we work with youth clubs, we work with football groups, we work with everybody so that we're all working together to kind of build relationships between us and to ensure that young people have support. Interactions, really important piece of work which we've been doing for a long time now, is about taking the power of storytelling and the arts into pupil referral units, so working with young people who've been excluded from mainstream education. Speech bubbles, really fabulous programme which actually is for years 1 and 2 and is about using drama. It's all totally evaluated, evidence-based, but it's using drama with 5 and 6-year-olds who have communication issues, and it can literally revolutionise. We work quite frequently with selective mutes, and through this programme they start talking. So it's using those basic art skills. So then pathways to employment, really critical, is that we, back in kind of around 2000, we started working out that a lot of the 16-year-olds we were working with had kind of become a bit, it was as much as we could offer them. So we started, but they were also likely to need money, and at that time probably end up selling drugs in order to get that money. So we started offering them paid work to come back and support the young people. We thought this was very generous of us. I have to say it was the other way around, because they revolutionised how we did it. So almost all of our groups will be facilitated by, you might have quite senior staff, you might have emerging staff, but you will also have 16, 17, 18-year-olds who might be still at school, still part of our programme, but become peer leaders. And the young people are much more likely to relate and talk to them than they are to the more experienced staff. So that kind of who we work with and trying to be representative of our community is vital. And what's your story? So this is an employment programme about building confidence, and really it does kind of say it is giving people the power. So this is, for example, we work with quite a lot of women from diverse ethnic backgrounds who've been out of work for a while and who have lost the voice to say who they are. So in going forward for interviews, actually, if you don't feel confident in an interview to say who you are, then it's really hard to get a job. So it's literally about, coaching people, using various exercises and therapeutic tools to enable people to tell their own stories. And then not forgetting our work with over 50s. So we do this with older people, and a lot of our very early work was with older people, using storytelling and the power of drama to go out into communities, work in care homes and sheltered housing mainly actually, and local community groups, to put older people in touch with each other through the power of telling stories. And we also do a lot of community workshops. And just very briefly, a big area of work under COVID was that we actually turned that all into a radio show during COVID and ran a locally based radio programme during COVID, which connected mainly older people, but it went out far and wide, and actually was particularly appreciated in Australia, bizarrely, from people that used to live in London. So it's that sense of connection and finding out what's going on in your local community and finding out about the arts. So I think, so just briefly give you a few pictures. This is Breakout, which is one of our summer holiday projects, which was in Hackney Wick. Pressure Drop. I've not mentioned Pressure Drop. So obviously at the peak of what we do is that we create professional pieces of drama to tour to various community groups. So thankfully funded by our wonderful patron Idris Elba, we had the money to create a new show. We literally have not created a new show for schools since we had a Conservative government, and that is just indicative of what happens in the shift in power. But Idris Elba gave us the money, because it takes a lot of money to research and create a new show. And this is a show which we're touring to years 9 and 10, which we researched and developed with young people. And the issues that have arisen out of it is a lot of it is about sexting and the culpability, how women get blamed, girls get blamed for what happens to them. And very interesting. So this is provoking really interesting conversations. And I've been in workshops where young 14-year-old girls are saying, no, it's her fault. It's her fault. She shared the image. She shared the image with her boyfriend. So, creating debate through that. And also toxic masculinity. If the boy dissed his mum, did he have the right to stab him? And still in schools, you'll find young people going, but he dissed his mum. So we're not saying killed. We're just saying stabbed. But, theatre can provoke conversations that teachers simply cannot have. So, within Pressure Drop, and we're doing it again in April, the power of theatre, if you've researched it properly, to really create a platform for people to talk about change. So there was a last slide about theatre exchange, which is the older people's work, and also we now work intergenerationally. So that was in it. Actually, you can't see the kids, but we created a play with 12 old people and 7 young people, which we then created as a radio show. Amazing, the use of radio. You can do it so quickly or cheaply, and you can bring people together. So for those of you that don't know Hackney is that pink one there. Hackney is inner London. And actually, I would say that when I started living there back in the early 90s, and certainly when I set up the company in 1996, was known of an area, oh my goodness, you live in Hackney, are you safe? It's like Hackney had this kind of shock word around it. There were a lot of problems. The education system had virtually collapsed. The schools were being closed through health and safety reasons. It was known as being very, very poor. People thought that you were taking your life in your hands to live in Hackney. Hackney has changed quite a lot, but actually it's only changed for some people. So just to look at the current demographic, I thought would be quite interesting for you to see, is that we have a very high proportion of, it's very simple, black, they just say here, but people from Caribbean and African backgrounds, much higher than it is in London or in, obviously in England, a high proportion of Asian, but it's a very, very mixed community is what I'm just trying to indicate there. Just took these, it's the 11th most deprived local authority overall in England. You'd be surprised if you looked at some of the shops, you'd think we were the richest. Poverty rate is 36%, which is well above the London average. 54% of working age people are unemployed and has the highest rate of mortality. Sorry. It's better than what it was. And this just kind of shows you, so the dark blue here is intense deprivation. And then the lighter colours are no deprivation at all. We have incredibly wealthy people living in Hackney, incredibly wealthy. And actually now we have this mix. It creates different challenges than when everybody was in it together and we felt like we were all living in a difficult environment. This kind of juxtaposition of rich and poor is an interesting challenge. So we are still working with the most deprived, we are still working with pockets of intense deprivation, despite being a walk away from the city of London. And maybe that's one of the things that makes it so intense. So when I set up Immediate Theatre in Hackney, I was doing it because there were lots of artists living in Hackney. So I was able to say, I employ people who live in Hackney. No, none of my colleagues can afford to live in Hackney now. So I cannot any longer say I employ people that live in Hackney. The fact that I was housed in Hackney, as I said, was really critical. And actually, I'm going to talk about one of our very first pieces of work, which was back in 1998, which was all surrounding something called the Comprehensive Estate Initiative. Does that ring any bells to anybody? Really important. Margaret Thatcher, you've heard of her, decided that the only way councils could spend any money on their deteriorating housing was to sell off their social housing. So obviously some of that was the right to buy, which you'll probably be familiar with, but it was also that the councils would literally sell off blocks. Now, Hackney had a huge amount of housing. It inherited some of it from the Greater London Authority. So it really had more housing than it could cope with, and it had no money to do anything with it. So tenants were offered the option between staying as a council tenant and getting nothing done to their estate despite all the problems, and shifting to having it sold to a social landlord and getting lots of work done on their blocks. But the idea was that people needed to be consulted on this. How do you consult people? How do you encourage people in? So one of the first projects that Immediate Theatre did was actually a piece of street theatre, which we researched with the community and with the housing officers. And we went out onto the streets on days when they had consultation days, doing this theatre to encourage people to come in and talk to the council about the changes that were being made. We created a character called William Williamson the 24th, who was an architect who lived in Hampstead-on-the-Hill, so he could look down on London and therefore knew what we needed. He had the most rubbish ideas. He thought that there should be a helicopter pad put on top, that they should all be turned into tower blocks with helicopter pads on top so you could get a direct line to Canary Wharf. So by actually having really bad ideas, it provoked the residents to say, what a rubbish idea. So actually having something to argue with meant some people started having ideas that they might not have, that they hadn't bothered to engage with until we gave them a really bad idea. Does that make sense? Yeah? And we had a lovely character who was called, who was the oldest woman in the world. And she was terribly frail and couldn't really do anything. But then when you asked the right question, she was a militant activist. And you know, had been all her life and started railing about things. So there's various ways. We had a childminder, we had a caretaker. We created these characters by working with the community, who then provoked them into getting engaged in the Comprehensive State Initiative. Very interesting as well, working with council workers, that when you really pin them down, they said, I don't, you know, I'm having to sell something. I don't know whether I agree with it. I would say some of those social landlords that we took over, we still work with. And they've been great and they've supported our work within the community. But, you know, we have a housing crisis which is partly created by what went on in those years. What more can I say? But I think it shows how immediate theatre from the outset, we've not been coming and saying, we're going to do a play for you. We've been coming in and engaging with the council and saying, what would you like us to make theatre about? And that actually comes from the Rio Earth Summit, which set global objectives for 2020. And one of those was about community involvement and participation, not consultation. And as a local resident, I was going to those meetings and I kept on finding myself saying, theatre could deal with that, theatre could engage you in that way. So from the outset, it's about how theatre engages with community strategy and change. Does that make sense? Yeah? Shall I go on to another story? I've talked about access. I did mention access. So the thing about access is, you talk about how have we made UCL accessible? How everybody's interested in access. For us, the thing is that we go to them, that we start where it is, rather than talking about creating a pathway to. Interestingly, Immediate Theatre has now very recently got a really nice office space, thank you Idris, and thank you Hackney Council because they paid for most of it, with a rehearsal space and a meeting room and everything. Prior to that, we worked in tiny offices because all our work happened outside. So we were very much, it's not about, you know, the theatre doesn't always takes place where we are. So immediate theatre means right here, right now. Not in some building over there, but it's about where we are here today and it's happening, we are here. That's what immediate theatre means. I'm actually going to talk now, I've got about another 10 minutes, yeah? I'm going to talk about one of my favourite subjects, which is Shaquila Scarlett. Shaquila Scarlett is now chair of Immediate Theatre. But I'll talk about the beginning. Shaquila was a resident of the Woodbury Down area. Any of you that know that area, it's the north of the borough. It's one of the largest estates in Europe. Fairly notorious. One of my workers once went up there and he lived in Lambeth. And he said, my God, I've never seen an estate like this. It has now been torn down and re-established. And my sister lives in a penthouse in it, which I find a bit tricky. But Shaquila lived in that area. And she, aged 12, had been excluded from school because I think she'd been carrying a knife. This basically, and actually this is in the press, Shaquila had been threatened by a bully repeatedly to do something, and she had made the decision that she was safer to do what the bully asked than to not do it, but she was excluded for doing that. And she was excluded from school, initially permanently excluded, which is a very big deal, though this was later relented on. But during this time when she'd been excluded, her mother bumped into one of my staff who was doing street outreach work with flyers, got her to come and join the local youth theatre when she was literally doing nothing but being at home. And she got involved in that youth theatre, which was just like we were doing a 6-week programme in a little block. And then she stayed and she came to the one that was just up the road, which we were running permanently. And she got involved in theatre and began to find confidence. She did appeal and she did get reinstated in school. But, you know, she talks now about she and her mother faced a panel of governors. And the terror of doing that and trying to tell your story in front of people that have power, she decided at that age she wanted the power. Makes me cry, I'm sorry. Like that man on the pottery show. So Shaquila joined she didn't want to be an actor, no interest, she wanted to be a train driver, that's what Shaquila wanted to do. But she did want to have her voice heard, and so we at that point set up a youth board, and she came along, and within the second session she said, I'm going to lead this youth board. And she did. By about 14, she was leading our youth board. She did also then, we got her involved in various, so through our kind of peer opportunities. She was never a peer facilitator actually, Shaquila, but she got involved in this project, which actually run in partnership with, I think it was with Birkbeck, wasn't it? Anyway, so a local academic that had got involved with immediate theatre through Equality's work wanted to train up local young people as peer researchers to make work about what home meant to young people in Hackney. Do you want me to show you a tiny clip of it? Yeah. Can you hear that? Yeah. Gives me a rise. It's very quiet.
Born in the East, raised in North, working most and studying. People ask what does Hackney mean? Well, it's not just my home, it's a part of it. Some Hackney is always seen in a negative light.
Can you hear it?
Yes. But there's more to the area than many people know. To me, space means freedom. When I use certain public spaces, I use them to escape my day-to-day and use open spaces to escape. My favourite space is art.
I'm going to leave that.
It's easy to
I think I've given you a little taster of it. So Shaquila did this initiative. She was involved in several others, and when she turned 18, she joined our trustees and was a very effective trustee, taking over chair of our board from Professor Melissa Butcher in 2021. And Melissa, who is head of geography at Birkbeck, was pretty clear that Shaquila would probably do a better job than she was doing. And she did. Her first away day, she came into a room full of finance people, social worker leads. I mean, we have people on our board, although most of them will have lived experience, some of them are pretty impressive. And Shaquila said, right, we're going to change the way this works. Age 25 at that point, and they applauded her. She is now chair of governors of Stoke Newington School, where she is now sitting on the other side of the exclusion panels and trying to give young people a proper voice and enabling them to be heard. And watch this space, because this will not be where Shakila stops. Although she has given up the being train driver dream, although she nearly got there, but she does work for Transport for London and manages the Woolwich Ferry. So, you know, for me, that is just a wonderful moment of success, because there is a young person that we took when they really needed their story told, and now she's changing the story. That woman is changing the story, but you know, and she believes in the power of the arts, but she works for London Transport. And for me, that is exactly what I imagined. I also wanted to talk about, you know, you talk a lot about case studies, and this is a case study. But there are some cases where case studies are really hard to work with. So Hackney's done a lot of work around young black men and the challenges of young black men. And as a group that do a lot of work with this client group, we were asked to put forward a case study. And I said, no, I don't think putting forward a case study of a young black man is going to help you much. So what I did was I brought together a lot of different groups that work with young black men and had youth workers and young people in the room. And I used a really simple character creation exercise where everybody contributes to the making of the character. We agreed that we thought that character was believable. We created several and decided on which one we liked. And then we got a young black man who liked acting to role play that character. That character was then introduced to the chief executive of Hackney Council and the head of education, the head of this person and that person. And they were able to question Calvin, as we called him, about his life and his experience and where his issues had been. And because it wasn't a real person, there was, you could say, but why did your dad leave? Or, you know, you could ask really personal questions. And he could answer them. Sometimes he'd say, I'm sorry, I don't want to answer that. He didn't answer everything. And there were also other young people in the room who could go, hang on a minute, my experience was this. Or, you know, they could chip in. But Calvin was able to present his problems to these people. And the wonderful moment we had was that a council staff member said, the chief executive, can't remember what his name is, he's left now, but the chief executive was in a big kind of Hackney staff meeting talking about some changes in judicial process. And he went, hang on, how would that affect Calvin? And so this pretend character, not a play, not some huge piece of artwork, this little piece of art that had been made by local young people was there in the room with them challenging, how will this affect Calvin? And it enabled them to talk about it, and they appreciated it, how much it enabled them to talk about the experience of the young people they were talking about. So that's not a real story, that's a made-up story. And making up stories is absolutely critical. I've lost my place. So very briefly, I wanted to talk about COVID, because obviously COVID switched things enormously, and the agility of a small community arts organisation to shift and change and do what we saw as needed was very important. I mean, we happened to have some money in the bank, which was about a project which, as COVID happened, we weren't going to be able to do. So I just went, well, let's spend it all on computers and tablets for the young people that are not accessing education. And let's get it out there. And we were contacting parents and they were going, no, we're fine. And Charmaine, who is my amazing Salt of the Earth youth worker, who, by the way, will never write a report or fill in a register, but will do the most amazing work, or she will fill in a register. Shouldn't badmouth her. But she said, I'm going out on the streets, we're going to find them. And we went out, and when we went out, we found that a lot of them were really not okay at all. So we started delivering food, we started linking them up with local services, craft packs, art packs, and tablets. And then, as a result of the fact then, when London funders started to say, who needs money? We'd say, well, we've spent this, we need this. And then the money started to flow in, and the biggest piece of work we did under that was Hackney Social Radio, which you can find online, but created this radio, not computerised, but you could access it on the radio, sense of communication for older people in the community who were digitally isolated. But interesting, I would say, is that this year we have been given a grant by Hackney Council, not very much in the scheme of things, it's £18,000, but it has no key performance indicators. So they are not paying us to deliver 10 workshops on an estate, or, well, it wouldn't be 10, but a programme of workshops on an estate. They are not paying us to improve young people's confidence from here to here, or get people to improve in their well-being scale from 5 to 10. None of that. They are paying us, and they are going to come in. We have a key worker who is looking to, so she works for the council in strategy, who is going to understand what it is we achieve in order to decide what the outcome of their investment is. So we are at a really interesting point where, and it's not only Hackney that's doing this, other places are saying, how come the community sector was so much on the ground and able to respond? How come the community sector have real relationships with people that council services don't? Very interesting, I heard in some feedback, we have to go to all these meetings to talk about it, but a guy who's like head of, I don't know, some social services department, and he worked with a food bank, which works with older people, and he had gone down to visit them and ended up having to fill out forms with their residents who struggled to do it online. And he said, at the end of that session, I had learned more about the clients I'm actually working with and what I'm trying to achieve than in all my time, in this job where I manage all these people. And so it's this thing that, the services that the government say we're providing are so far removed from the need of the people who find it hardest to voice what they need, that, the community sector has to be brought in. And indeed, and I'm proud that I'm representing the arts within that. So just, as well to say, one of the big pieces of work I'm doing at the moment, although I will be using the arts, but it's about creating a partnership, put in an application which is a partnership led by Immediate Theatre and another voluntary sector organisation, but which includes Hackney Work, so that's Department of, it's the job centre, includes the youth service, it includes the mental health services, it includes the NHS, to look at the employability and mental well-being of 18 to 25-year-olds, who in Hackney, we have one of the worst rates of people going from 16 to 19 and actually going into progressing in the country. Don't know why, but we do. We have this really bad rate. So why is that? This is about the combination of well-being and employability. And the need, for me, is, all our approaches are about using a creative and arts approach to helping people to think about who they are, and so that they can present their story and think about their story changing in the future. Because I think one of my kind of tenets is, if you want people to change, you have to enable them to imagine being different. And that is what I feel is the role of the arts within society. Thank you.